that is actually a notion that I took from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a botanist and an author. And her philosophy is that sustainability isn't enough. Reciprocity is what's needed. And we need to look at it as a reciprocal relationship where we have a responsibility to give back. And so it's just kind of, I feel like it's a subtle difference, but to me it was really powerful in that it's not just enough to maintain it. We have to rebuild.
Welcome to the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast, inspiring real women with a passion for fishing and the outdoors to go get their adventure on. Now, here's your host, Angie Scott and Barb Carey.
Welcome to the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast. We're on episode 47, approaching 50 episodes on this crazy ride that began just a year ago. Most podcasts don't make it past 7 episodes, so that's something to be pretty proud of. And we're not going anywhere. We're 100% committed to the Woman Angler and Adventurer movement, and we're so thrilled to have you be a part of it. To help gain more exposure, we've brought on a field promotions person, and we created a Facebook page. That's not to be confused with the Facebook group that you're already hopefully a member of. That's a closed group, and we wanted to make a page to try and reach more people. So you could really help us out by giving us a like on the new page. We've also revamped our YouTube channel, so we're going to start adding some more videos soon, so please subscribe to that. I'm going to get my drone pilot's license here pretty quick, and I just upgraded my computer so I can start producing out some pretty cool GoPro videos, so stay tuned to the YouTube channel. Quick announcement before we jump into a great conversation with Kara Armano and Marcia Brownlee from Artemis Sportswomen. Barb Carey will be at the Wisconsin Fishing Expo in Madison, Wisconsin, February 22nd through the 24th. She's going to be there representing Wisconsin Women Fish and the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast. So if you're able to make it, please be sure and stop by and say hello. And I noticed our friend Nicole Stone, who's been on the show a couple times, is going to be there as well, presenting on using social media to make ice fishing connections. So I'm sure that'll be a pretty cool talk. All right, so enough housekeeping for today. If you're someone who loves fishing, hunting, or other outdoor adventures, which I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you probably are if you're listening to this show, then conservation issues are likely something very near and dear to your heart. We want to introduce you to Artemis Sportswomen. Kara and Marcia are going to give you a little background on the organization, what they're doing to help with the many issues threatening our world as we know it, and how you can help even if you don't have any idea where to start. So without further ado, here we go. Marcia and Kara, welcome to the Woman Angler and Adventurer podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're going to get into what Artemis is and what you stand for here in a moment, but I want to give the listeners just a little bit of chance to get to know you ladies before we jump into all that. So, Kara, let's kick things off with you. Would you mind, I was reading your bio, would you mind talking a little bit about your great-grandmother and what kind of woman she was and how that influenced your path?
Yeah, sure. Her name was Grace, and she was raised in Sun River, Montana, which is a tiny, tiny little town north of Great Falls. Where this tiny little town, walked to school every day and helped her parents, with all the chores and stuff. And so outdoor kid growing up her whole life, and then moved to Northwest Wyoming outside of Powell. And that's always where I knew her. And we spent a lot of time visiting her on our way from Wyoming, where I grew up to my grandparents' house in Montana. And we'd spend a lot of time out in Montana, camping and fishing and hiking and all those kinds of things. And almost every single year she would come with us camping. And up until she was like 96, I think she came camping with us. So yeah, just really strong, bold woman, very wise. She was widowed at a young age. I think my great-grandfather died right after I was born, so I never knew him. So I just always knew her as just a really strong, powerful, thoughtful woman. And she was always really great about getting us outside, and that kind of continued down the line too. Her daughter, my grandmother, was also very outdoorsy. We always spent every summer camping and playing outside and going on hikes and all those kinds of things. And then my father is the one who fished. My great grandmother fished too, but not like she's the one who taught me. She just kind of is the one more who taught me to take nature in and be observant and notice your surroundings and see what's all out there and kind of take it all in every time you're out in the woods. It still resonates strongly with me today. And then because of that, my dad was always into the outdoors, and his dad was a hunter and fisherman. And then he really got into fly fishing kind of later in life and had always done that as far as my memory goes. And so I was always jealous when he and my older brother would get to go and go fishing for the day. And I was too young for them to take along just because, you know, they'd have to piggyback me across rivers or whatever was the case. But then as I grew a little bit older, my dad was willing to take me fishing with him. Whenever we'd go camping in Montana, we'd go outside of Missoula on Rock Creek. And so my days as a youth in the summertime were really spent tromping around the waters on Rock Creek and learning how to fish and kind of bringing that whole observation of nature thing into play while fishing. And so I was about 8 or 10 years old, somewhere around there is when I really started getting into fly fishing and loved the sport and would go out with my dad and brother every single day on our camping trips and fished sometimes all day. Much to my mom and my sister's chagrin, we were gone and they would hang around camp and do whatever else. But if I wasn't fishing, I was always in the river, moving rocks around and making little dams and watching fish kind of come and chill out there and hang out and catching minnows and, you know, just always interested in kind of what's going on, especially when it comes to water and fishing and all that kind of stuff.
Did your mom and sister get into fishing at all at any point?
No, my mom tried it a little bit, but she never liked it. And same with my sister, just not their jam. They'd always rather go on hikes and do wildflower hunts and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's not like they weren't enjoying nature, just not the way we did.
Gotcha. Well, I love that you had such a strong role model, a female role model in your great-grandmother and your grandmother. I love hearing stories about the older generations of women that just went after it because that was so rare back then and, you know, starting to shift a little bit now. But I just find that so inspiring. So very cool.
Yeah, it was fun to learn from such wise women.
And Marcia, I was reading your bio, and it said that you didn't really you've always been really into the outdoors, but didn't really get into hunting and fishing until you were in your 30s. How did that come about?
So yeah, I grew up in Michigan, and in my childhood, those summer camping trips on the lakes or in the woods were definitely a part. So I had a deep connection to nature that I kept with me for my whole life and then took into my career as an educator, as an adult. But it wasn't until I moved out to Montana that I really started paying more attention to fishing and then eventually getting out hunting. And Carrie, you and I have Rock Creek in common. That was sort of where I started fly fishing and fell in love with the fish, really. But I think I started hanging around. When you move to Montana, you start to hang around people who fly fish a little bit more frequently than they do in Michigan. And so it started by just, accompanying them on those trips and watching, and then just asking questions and get really interested in what was happening, and then picking up a rod myself and trying it. And, fly fishing has a really steep learning curve, but when you have a taste of success, it's really intoxicating. And so just kind of fell in love with it and continued. And I think, again, with fly fishing, I've been fly fishing for about 9 years now, but it is a steep learning curve. And if you have a lifestyle that doesn't accommodate going out very frequently, that learning curve can take a few years. And so I always joke that I've been fishing for 9 years, but I've only been intentionally catching fish for the last 3. And still kind of working on perfecting all of the components that come with that. And then hunting. I've been hunting for the last 5 years. And just kind of a similar path, just interested in engaging more deeply in the ways that I was connecting with nature.
What type of hunting do you do?
So big game, rifle hunting mostly. I've hunted deer, antelope, bear, unsuccessfully hunted elk, but still giving it a shot.
Well, you're the first person I've come across who's touted herself as a wildflower aficionado. That struck me as really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I didn't get into that again until I was an adult, and I moved so after Michigan, I lived in Massachusetts for 7 years and then moved to Colorado, and noticing just how different the spring flowers were in Colorado from what I was used to in Michigan. And so then really paying attention to what I was seeing, and learning about the historical uses of those flowers, both medicinal and for food, and just trying my best to get to know them, and then transferring that to Montana and being really fascinated, because when I lived in Colorado, I lived at a higher elevation, and just I was really fascinated when I moved to Montana to a lower elevation to see these same plants and how different they can look just depending on the elevation and the amount of water and sunlight that they get. The same plant can be hard to identify in two different states. And just really getting to know them and learn about them. And I just love them.
Really cool. So let's get into what Artemis is all about, and how did it come into being?
It was kind of the brainchild of Aaron Kindle, who I met when he was at TU, Trout Unlimited, and he had since left and gone on to National Wildlife Federation, and was always really interested in figuring out ways to get new people talking about conservation. So not necessarily, to say that the conservation communication has been done incorrectly over the last, 100 years or whatever from the sportsman's perspective, but engaging new demographics into that. So like when I worked with him at TU, we were working on a program through the Sportsman's Project, conservation project that was Trout Unlimited, to kind of get ranchers together and ag interests and oil and gas developers and recreational users, as well as sportsmen, talking about some issues that were relevant to all of us. And so that was kind of always his passion. And then when he went to National Wildlife Federation, he kind of saw a big hole there with not a lot of women getting involved in that conversation, especially when it came to wildlife. And so it's kind of funny to me that a man helped start Artemis, but it really kind of was his brainchild. And then he reached out to a lot of women that he knew, one being Jessie Johnson, who was one of the co-founders as well. And she works for the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. Myself, because we had worked on these other projects together, as well as I think 8 other women were the co-founders all over the Western United States, who were really passionate about conservation, wildlife, and kind of how those two intermingled, as well as kind of changing the paradigm of how that conversation is framed and how women can kind of come into being leaders in that conservation space, as well as maybe framing that communication around that a little bit differently. And so January of 2017, we all got together and kind of put words down on paper in terms of kind of what our goals were and how it would come together, and what we kind of wanted to accomplish with it. And a lot of that's still coming on board. As you've probably known, Marcia is a fairly new addition. She's our first full-time employee for Artemis. The rest of us are volunteer on numerous different levels, figuring out how we can expand that from the Intermountain West eventually to be national. We have ambassadors in quite a few states now, as well as an advisory council, of which I'm a part of, that, is kind of continuing pushing these things forward and figuring out how we can kind of talk about our 3 main tenets of how Artemis was founded, which is protecting public lands and waters and speaking up for those when it makes sense. So we got pretty involved in the National Monuments debate last year, in regards to protecting those public lands and waters. We also are are prominent in terms of speaking about iconic species, especially in the Intermountain West. So we're mainly focusing on cutthroat trout and mule deer and flash sage grouse because they live in this really, really similar areas and are very affected by each other's ranges and what's going on with those situations. So species that are indicative of overall ecosystem health, because obviously cutthroat trout need very cold, clean water to survive. So we step up to advocate for maintaining those kinds of ecosystems for their long-term health. And then the biggest tenet that we've really been pushing lately is empowering women to become leaders in the conservation space. Because if you look around, most conservation organizations are run by men. And not to say that they're doing a bad job at all, because they're doing great work, but women have a lot to say. And I think they have a little bit different story to tell in terms of what those lands and waters and wildlife mean to them. And so we want to give them the tools that they need to advocate for those issues that matter most to them. And so that's kind of how, I guess, a little bit of the how and the why of what Artemis is.
Do you find that like women just tend to be maybe a little bit more intimidated, and maybe that's why by the political climate, and maybe that's why they're not as apt to jump in and get involved? And do you feel like their voices are heard and taken as seriously as men's voices are?
I'll jump in and take that one. I do think they are taken as seriously, and I don't know so much if it's an issue of intimidation rather than an issue of not being invited to the table. A lot of the communications that happen around conservation are geared towards the sporting community, which typically predominantly is sportsmen. And so when we broaden the conversation to not only include women, but to say specifically, we're asking you to come to the table and to speak up about these issues that are important to you. It's just, again, it's hard to imagine doing what you're not seeing modeled. And so we're just modeling it and inviting women into the conversation. And I think those voices are actually extremely powerful because it's different. It's a change of scene when you have a sportswoman walk into a community meeting and voice her opinion. It's something new and it's something different, and I think people are paying a little bit more attention to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was listening to a podcast the other day. It's a podcast I reference quite a bit on this show, actually, by these two brothers down in Florida called Salt Strong. So completely different arena. Like, they focus on saltwater fishing. There's a lot of issues going on in Florida right now in terms of conservation. And they mentioned that it's interesting that our industry, the outdoors industry, hunting, fishing, all of that, we don't have like just one big organization. Like, you look at the NRA that has tens of millions of members, and they have, they can make a huge impact in getting accomplished what they want to get accomplished. But it seems like our industry is so segmented. Like, you have the saltwater people, you have the fly fishing community, you have, all these different, the Ducks Unlimited, all these things. Are there any conversations about like everybody coming together and there being just one massive powerhouse group that fights for these issues?
That's a complicated question. I do know in my work with the National Wildlife Federation that behind the scenes there's a lot of coalition work that happens. In particular, one of the major issues that Artemis is working on now is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and there's a huge coalition of organizations that are collaborating to make sure that our work is in line and supportive of each organization. But again, that's behind the scenes. I don't know what that would look like if it were to move to the forefront and be just a one cohesive voice. But I think the coalition itself has a lot of power and the ability to speak to a lot of different groups that respond to very different messages and hopefully bring them to the table on the same issue. So I do think there's some strength in the diversity as long as the ability to work as a coalition remains strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. It sounds like that might be the answer, just because of the nature of the industry, that a coalition might have the biggest impact. So yeah, that makes sense. So Artemis has some pretty lofty goals. I was reading them on the website. Has there been any, I know it's fairly new, but have you seen progress thus far?
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a ton of energy right from the get-go. I think this mission really spoke to people who were eager to get involved. And then, as Kara mentioned, I'm a recent addition to the team. I started in June and have been able to work fairly integrated with the public lands team. And, my sole mission is to help engage sportswomen in conservation advocacy. So I spend all of my time doing that, and we've made significant leaps and bounds in sort of promoting our brand online. But then we also just launched a state ambassador program. So we have state ambassadors who are volunteer leaders across the interior West who we will work with to really form those on-the-ground relationships with other sportswomen and help support them and mentor them, both in their sporting capacity, but also in their conservation capacity to really get work done. And we've also deepened, one of the great things about the National Wildlife Federation is each state has its own affiliate office. And Artemis is developing relationships with those affiliate offices to work on local issues. And so the last 6 months, a lot of the growth that we've had has been in relationship building and then program development for moving forward. So 2019 is going to be great.
Well, you mentioned too in your bio, you said that sustainability isn't enough. Can you dig a little bit deeper into what you mean by that?
Yeah, so that is actually a notion that I took from Robin Wall-Kimmerer, who's a botanist and an author. And her philosophy is that sustainability isn't enough. Reciprocity is what's needed. Sustainability is important. It's a reciprocity that's necessary, and that, the earth gives a lot to us. And we need to look at it as a reciprocal relationship where we have a responsibility to give back. And so it's just kind of, I feel like it's a subtle difference, but to me it was really powerful in that it's not just enough to maintain it. We have to rebuild.
Yeah, no, that's why I wanted to point that out, because that struck me as a really powerful thought too. So often we just think, we have to sustain our resources, but it's a lot deeper than that. To really make an impact and make it better for future generations. So, and there's a lot of work to do. So,
there is.
Thank you guys for what you're doing. And, and if there's anything that we can do to help, please let us know. And how do people get involved, our listeners out there, if they want to get involved? What are some of the best things that they can do?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to join Artemis, and you can do that by going to our website. It's artemis.nwf.org, and joining is free. That just gets you on our list, so you get the monthly newsletter, and it gives us an idea of where our demographic hubs are. So when we are planning events and planning outreach, we know where to find you. It gives us information on what your specific conservation interests are. So if there's action that needs to happen in Southern Montana, we can reach out to you specifically and say, hey, this is happening. Here's what you can do to help. Let us know if you want to do more. And so that just gives us a lot of information to reach out and form a personal relationship. You can also follow us on social media. We have Facebook account, Instagram, and Twitter. It's Artemis Sportswomen. But I would encourage everybody to sign up, because that definitely gives us an opportunity to build a meaningful relationship with you and help you build the skills specific to your interests.
We want to get women involved on whatever level they want to get involved on. Some women aren't really going to be the ones to step up and say, I want to fly to DC and talk to my congressman. That's, kind of an extreme example, but a lot of them want to, talk to family and friends about kind of some of the issues they might be seeing in their backyards when they're out hunting or fishing. And that's great too. Maybe we can ask some of them to sign petitions at some point or write letters to the editor. There's lots of different levels and ways to engage. So, we want to make it very approachable for a wide variety of interests, time, investments, issues that they're passionate about, so don't be afraid and don't get run off by the what can be kind of a little bit daunting in terms of advocacy work. We'll help you get there. If you want to pursue that and grow what you can do, then that's what we're all about. We can kind of facilitate that and help you figure out how best to communicate the message that you're most passionate about and move those issues forward.
Yeah, so if someone out there has never gotten involved in this space before and they're thinking about it, you guys actually kind of train them on how to like talk to their representatives and that type of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've held a handful of advocacy trainings. Let's see, quite a few states now, right, Marcia? Montana. We did a couple in Wyoming, one in Colorado, a couple in New Mexico, I believe. And so I think that will be something that's ongoing in terms of educating. And it doesn't have to just be women who show up, certainly. Anybody who's interested in wanting to get involved in talking to elected officials or whatever that might be, go to city meetings, go to county game commissioner meetings, those kinds of things, and speak up for the concerns that they're seeing. Because, we rely on these sportswomen. They're the ones out there seeing it. They're the ones out there in their backyard and noticing it changes from day to day, year to year, season to season, those kinds of things. So we need those people out there and talking about it and getting involved. And we're happy to help them figure out that best way for them to get involved and encourage them to do that however they're comfortable.
One other thing that we are interested in doing is education on the issues, because it's incredibly complicated. Each issue that we deal with is incredibly complicated, and it's difficult to find information that kind of boils it down to the nuts and bolts. And so for women interested in getting into conservation, in addition to helping them with the advocacy skills, just really understanding the complexity of the issues and helping them begin there.
Well, cool. Like I said, I think it's so cool what you guys are doing, and that you are inviting women to the table, like you said. And that's kind of what we're doing with this podcast, is showcasing women and that are out there hunting and fishing, and leaders in the space, to just inspire more women to get involved in the sport, because there's like we mentioned earlier, it's traditionally a male-dominated sport, and so when you see other women out there doing it, then that can encourage you to get involved as well. And so that definitely applies to the conservation space as well. So totally support what you're doing. Before we wrap it up, we have a Woman Angler and Adventurer Facebook group, and I had mentioned yesterday that we were going to be having this conversation for a future podcast episode. And first of all, Jen Ripple chimed in this morning and said to give a shout out to Kara. She says you're the best.
Awesome. I love Jen. She's great.
Yeah, we interviewed Jen and Heather when they were on their Rip and Hoppers adventure.
Oh yeah.
They stopped in Nashville, was their first stop, and so I was able to meet with them at the Fly Shop and do an interview, and it was a blast. Oh, we had so much fun.
A hoot, for sure. So is Heather, for that matter. They're both great, and
so
we're actually talking to them from an Artemis perspective on how we can kind of help them with their tour in 2019. So
cool.
Potentially look for some compilation there.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I can't wait for them to go back out again, because I was following them on their whole trip and watching their little live videos and stuff. And then when it ended, I was kind of sad. I was like, oh, I missed this. So I can't wait for them to go out again. But Jennifer Hall in our group had commented, she said, I'm always interested in hearing the catch and release versus catch and keep conservation. Personally, I fish, I'm going to eat it, but I wonder if women in particular tend to skew in this direction, or are they more catch and release, or is it about the same as men? Do you have any kind of insight on that from what you've seen?
Well, I don't have any scientific numbers or anything, but certainly from what I've seen, I've taught women fly fishing for a long, long time, and I think for the most part, they really kind of ascribe right off the bat to the catch and release and understand kind of the basic methods of healthy catch and release methods.
Mm-hmm.
really quickly. And I also think women just right off the bat, whenever they're getting involved into a new sport, understand the need to protect what they're after. I think it kind of goes back to what Marcia was saying with the reciprocity thing. Women really get that right off the bat. And so I think it's, like I said, I don't have specific numbers, but I do think it's pretty well understood by women that, you can't always catch what you catch. It's
Right.
It's just not a sustainable model. And it's something that they understand, like I said, instantly, generally.
And I wonder too if it's like different in fly fishing. I think it is different in fly fishing than like, just regular fishing, where it seems like in the fly fishing world, there's definitely a lot more. Well, rivers are more delicate for sure, that type of resource. And the type of fish, I think, too, are more delicate typically. So maybe that has, makes an impact on that as well. Hopefully we can have you on again and get a little bit more deep into maybe we could do an episode on specific tips for people that are wanting to get into conservation and the political space and how to navigate that. I think would be really cool. I'll share links to everything in the show notes, and that way people can go there and check that out. And the website again is artemis.nwf.org. So that sounds like that's the main place to go to sign up and get involved and go from there. So appreciate it again, and we will talk again soon, I hope.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Time, Andy.
All right. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode. Please go to thewomanangler.com/47 to find links to Artemis so you can help support them in their mission. There's some pretty cool photos there as well. Also, please remember to give us a quick like on the Facebook page. Thank you for all the great feedback on the show and for continuing to spread the word. We really appreciate it. I'm Angie Scott. Until next time, remember, only go fishing on the days that end in Y.